The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas-led Palestinian militants in Gaza continues to hold on the second day after coming into effect. With calm restored, thousands of displaced Palestinians are now starting to return to their homes. As Gazans take stock, aid groups warn that the devastation after 11 days of airstrikes and rocket attacks could take years to rebuild.
Before rebuilding homes and businesses, the arduous work of cleaning up rubble needs to be dealt with. The destruction left by Israeli airstrikes, launched in response to Hamas-fired rockets, has added fresh scars to Gaza's landscape. And there's also been a psychological impact on the people living here. We were very afraid of the Israeli airstrikes. I didn't sleep. We didn't have time to sleep. It was all very hard. I thank God that I came out of this war unharmed, but my feelings are confused. I can't say whether I'm happy or sad. It's very confusing. Humanitarian aid is arriving in Gaza, and it's urgently needed.
46%, as I mentioned before, of essential drugs and 33% of essential medical supplies are at zero stock. So even if the hospitals and clinics were functioning, they wouldn't be able to provide the care and services fully anyway because they lack the stocks.
Among those pledging to help in the Hamas-controlled enclave is the United States.
Hamas is a terrorist organization. We've recognized that. But that doesn't mean we should not be in Gaza, rebuilding Gaza for all those innocent people who, in fact, have been hurt and have been collateral damage.
It may take many months and years to rebuild the damage done in just a matter of days. Talks to ensure the Egypt-brokered ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians holds are ongoing. A key step towards finding a lasting solution to this decades-old conflict.
Let's speak now to our correspondent Tanya Kramer, who is in Gaza City. Tanya, good to have you with us. It's day 2 after rockets stopped hailing down on Gaza. You've been talking to people there. Is there any sense of life returning to normal?
Well, we've seen on Friday many people heading home, actually, those people who were displaced or were forced to flee to seek shelter in UN schools. Several thousands had to flee from their homes, and they were, of course, assessing their damage coming home. Some of them found their houses to be so damaged that they can't live in them anymore. Others had smaller damages, and, of course, others were just venturing out after 11 days, picking up the pieces after 11 days of bombardment, Israeli bombardment here in Gaza, but also rockets being fired into the south of Israel. They were checking on their neighborhood, they were checking on neighbors, on the damage and destruction in the city. There are mixed feelings among people. On the one hand, you have the narrative, the official narrative of victory. On the other hand, I heard people saying that the toll on the civilian population has been very high, and people are, of course, also very wary of what is there to come if, the underlying issues here are not addressed.
Focus is now on getting aid to bomb-shattered Gaza. What can you tell us about humanitarian efforts where you are?
Well, I think the damages and destruction is still assessed by the humanitarian organizations here in Gaza. We also know that several countries have already pledged with humanitarian aid to come in. And we saw on Friday a first shipment of humanitarian aid coming in through Kerem Shalom. That is the main crossing for goods from Israel into Gaza. But I think that one of the main issues will be the rebuilding of Gaza, and that will be rather complicated because Israel restricts building material coming into Gaza because it might be used by Hamas for dual use, for the building of tunnels, for example. And of course, we've seen after the war in 2014 that there was a special mechanism to deal with this issue because most of the international community also doesn't deal directly with Hamas, who's ruling Gaza.
Tanya Kramer, thank you very much for your update from Gaza City. Shani Rosanes is with me now. She's a DW journalist and an expert on Middle Eastern affairs. Shani, welcome to the program. Tensions are still running high. What needs to happen for this truce to really hold?
Well, it seems like both sides want to hold it. You know, we need to keep in mind behind everything we see, it's intent. And we see the political intent on both sides to start or to bring upon this escalation was high. And now they understand they got all they could have gotten from this, from this round of conflict. And now they need to keep it down. And it seems like it's going to hold for now, but we always need to be cautious in the Middle East, you know.
Both sides have been claiming victory after this last round of fighting, but really, are there any winners in this?
Well, if you ask the people counting their dads and, you know, burying their families, then there's never any victory in a war. But Hamas, on his side, has seemed victorious right from the very first rocket shot at Jerusalem, you know, bringing together the connection between what's happening in the Al-Aqsa Mosque after Israeli police forces raided and stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan days. And so for him to make that linkage between itself as the leadership of the Palestinian people, as a defender of Jerusalem, for them, that's already a victory. And they have managed to stay very strong with their offensive on Israeli targets throughout the 11 days of this operation. So for them, there's great achievements on their side. The Israelis, on the other hand, you know, they want to claim victory by having shown, you know, their resilience and so on. But it's clear to everybody that this is not going to make any seismic changes to what we're seeing, the dynamics on the ground. If you want to see something changing on the long term, there's got to be more. There's got to be talks. There's got to be aid, far more to make this sustainable.
Let's talk about the situation in the West Bank, because that is where most Palestinians live. How has this latest escalation reverberated there?
We've seen for Hamas a great success in making the link into Jerusalem, as we just mentioned. That means they're getting a lot of support from the West Bank and Jerusalem Palestinians. In the last days of the operation, like during the whole time we've been focusing on Gaza, but in the West Bank there have been 20 casualties, 20 people who lost their lives in clashes with Israeli forces. So, and we've seen yesterday in the celebrations in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, we see Hamas flags. This is not a common sight. It's at least it used to be a very rare sight, because the West Bank, Jerusalem, were always ruled by the dominance of the Palestinian Authority. Hamas leadership was not as strong as Fatah is in the West Bank. So what we're seeing now, and the biggest fear of Israel would be seeing things flaring up in the West Bank, and that would make things far more complicated. For now, it seems to be under control, but the tension is quite high, still, you know, lasting.
Where do you see the situation going from here?
Well, the key would be how to for Israel, for the Americans, for the West Bank leadership of the Palestinians, that is the Palestinian Authority, how can they regain control over the situation? And that means how can they weaken Hamas? And aid seems to be the main key here. What the Americans are trying to do, maybe with the support of the Emirates, for example, who are now connected to Israel, normalized ties with Israel last year during the Abraham Accords, they will try to see if there's a way for them to control aid in the way it's being channeled into infrastructure development in Gaza with the help of the West Bank leadership of Fatah. And that will help strengthen that leadership, who has never been as weak as we see it now. And it will help Gazans, of course, and hopefully Americans, Israelis hope that it will also help weaken Hamas. Hamas, on the other hand, is backed by Qatar, by Iran, but that axis that is straight, giving great money and helping them gain weapons and build infrastructure, that axis is a common old axis between Sunni forces and more Shia forces in the Arab Muslim world. It's not a conflict that's going to go away so fast, so soon.
Shani Rosanes, thank you very much for your analysis.
Thanks, Nicole.